How's it going, YouTube? Oxy here, and welcome back to my newest video. Today, as the title suggests, we're gonna go over some of the most popular, and I guess debunking as well, Little Nightmares 2 theories. And yeah, just go into like a discussion, and you guys can let me know if you agree, disagree, or if there's any ones that I missed on. Well, let's start with one of the main ones. So, is the Thin Man Mono? Is he the Hanging Man from Little Nightmares 1? Now, of course, there are some, I guess, so I'm against it, I don't believe it, but there is some evidence that would suggest that, hey, it makes sense. Like, for example, in Little Nightmares 1, in the very start of the game, you see this, very long, lanky man just hanging, right? Like, you never see the head, like, the upper body, but you could tell, he hung himself. There's a chair. There's essentially, what we interpret as a suicide note just off to the side. And, yeah, it's, obviously a lot of people, he was never, a character or anything, just, background, right? Just a hanging dead body. And, of course, the community came up with the name, the Hanging Man, because it was a guy that hung himself. And there was a lot of theories, even early on, that the Hanging Man was the geisha, which was the first game's essentially boss, right? The antagonist. Were they married? Was that her husband who killed himself? There's also the theory, there's a lot of theories within theories, that Six was the geisha's daughter. And there was evidence to back that up, too, of, the pictures in the geisha's quarters of, a little girl that obviously bears a striking resemblance to Six. And, everyone, everyone assumed, okay, so the mother, the father, and then Six, right? And that was the family, and I guess the father was mad at Six, so he killed himself. Well, sorry, not at Six. Was mad at the geisha for what was thought that the geisha, threw Six out, right? How you start the game in the suitcase. But a lot of people think it's the Thin Man, because for those that don't know, Little Nightmares 2 is pretty much, and we'll go into this one after, if the Little Nightmares 2 is a sequel or a prequel. But pretty much, most people agree that it's a prequel, and so the idea is, of course, at the end of the game, Six escapes, leaves Mono to his fate to essentially repeat they're in a time paradox, right? Where it's he will grow up to be the Thin Man, and it's a cycle. And essentially it's so Mono becomes the Thin Man, and obviously Six, we know, goes to the Ma, to the first game. And the idea is that the Thin Man followed Six, to try to get back at her or save her, I guess break the cycle. And he follows her to the Ma, and I guess the idea is that he felt guilty or something, and that he kills himself. Now, personally, that doesn't make sense to me at all, because again, it's a prequel, and it's a cycle, right? So, if Mono grows up to become the Thin Man, we're shown that at the end of the game. So how would he essentially die? He hung himself, and then it would continue. I mean, I guess you could say that, yes, Mono, the little boy, could always be reborn. I guess it's what I'm trying to say is that, the only way I could see it, people making sense out of it, is that there's also a theory that Little Nightmares is a TV show, right? Or it's these characters are stuck in no matter what happens in the world, they will always everything will play out the exact same way. So Mono will always become the Thin Man, Six will always betray him, things like that. And so I guess the idea is that Thin Man kills himself, right? He hung himself. And regardless, there will always be another new Mono, because, just look at the second game. We play as Mono, which we'll call, A, right? Character A. And then the Thin Man is introduced, and obviously it's like, but they're the same person. How does that work? And then it's like, that's B, right? So essentially it's like we play as A, and then there's B, but they're the same, you know? Essentially it's the same person. And the idea is that B, like the Thin Man, can always die, like, again, hangs himself, but then a new A could always be born, because it's like, it's destined to happen, like predetermined, like, you know, like we said, Mono will always grow up to be the Thin Man, and then Six will always betray him, and it'll just keep going. But like I said, I personally don't agree with it, because it's like, I don't know, that seems too like meta, like, you know, like too like out there to be like, nah. I think it's like, the Hanging Man is like his own separate character. Oh, and how could I forget too? Sorry, this is like, there we go. So the Very Little Nightmares, the mobile game, obviously in the timeline, it's accepted that that is the very first game, right? Like the farthest prequel, you could say. It's the beginning. The Pretender, the main villain of that game, there's a portrait of her, which you would assume are her parents, which is the teacher from the second game, and a familiar pair of legs and shoes, the Hanging Man. So there you go. It's like, how can the Thin Man, how can he, you know, Mono grow up to become him, have a kid? Again, the Pretender is pretty much like hinted at that, like, that's the daughter, so the guy that hung himself was the father. How would he have a kid in that short amount of time of like Six escaping the Pale City and then getting to the Ma? It's like, that doesn't make sense, you know? It's like, that would be some, like, that means Six stayed a child for, like, what, 20 years, you know? Like, because obviously we don't know their age, like, Mono and Six, but you'd assume, like, okay, maybe, like, 2 decades, 3 passed for him to have a kid, and it's like, that doesn't add up. So my verdict is that, nah, the Hanging Man and the Thin Man are 2 separate characters completely. Hey, I could be wrong, but I don't... Like I said, I don't agree with that one at all. But then, now, the other interesting theory that, of course, is like the big one. So, is Little Nightmares 2 a prequel or a sequel? Again, I'm on the side that it's a prequel, because the game heavily implies that. And, yeah, it's like, so here, let's look at it like this. We already know this. We already know the whole story of Mono and everything, right? Okay. The game ends. Six steps out, and that's where essentially we would see that Shadow Six for the first time. But we see her, and Shadow Six stares down at a poster of the Ma, implying like, you know, like, go there, like that's your next destination. Basically, it's like, pretty much without doing, she was pointing at it, right? To not, because obviously I imagine Tarsier Studios wants to keep it ambiguous, keep you guessing. Obviously pointing at it would be an obvious, like, oh, yeah, you know, go there. And yeah, looks at it, so obviously implies it. And then what do we hear? Six's hunger. If you remember in the first game, she was always hungry. She had those in moments, right, throughout the game where she gets hungry and it gets worse and worse, where first she eats like a small piece of bread, right, like the child gives her, and then she moves on to eat the runaway kid. And, you know, you get it. It goes like, it gets bigger and bigger until she finally kills the geisha. And yeah, it's like, so it's heavily implied this happened before, because throughout the whole second game, Six's hunger is like nowhere, right? So it's like, you know, how did she go from being hungry to not hungry? And then the biggest counter I could think of is, just look at the ending. The first game, Six got the geisha's powers, right? You see her walking through the halls, the dining halls, like literally absorbing everyone's life force with ease. So it's like, and she's waiting at the top of the Ma for a boat. Now we don't know, it's like, what, to get off the Ma, to kill them, right? We don't know. But you get what I'm saying? It's like, so, how do you go from being basically, like, all-powerful, and then we see Six, and she's, like, got captured by the hunter, and her power's gone. Now, the counter I hear is that, oh, maybe the since there is a lot of like magic involved, maybe the powers only work on the Ma, and so Six was able to get captured by the hunter, and you know it's like, oh, she didn't have them, but again it's like, why give your character, why give her all that power just to take it away, you know, like doesn't make sense, doesn't add up for me. And like again, the accepted timeline is like Little Nightmare, Very Little Nightmares 2, and then the first game, right? Because at the mobile game, you see Six, you see her essentially escape with the girl, the original girl in the yellow raincoat, where she falls, that is presumably dies in the water by the Pretender, right? The fall. You see the jacket, and Six escapes on a raft, and then you would think, okay, so she gets to the Pale City. Because in the comics, too, we know Six doesn't go to the Ma, like, directly, because she was taken there by the ferryman, you know, this, like, ugly dude with, like, a long face. Like, he's the one that took her to the Ma. So, obviously, Six, what's accepted is she escaped she escaped the nest. That's where the Pretender lived, this island out in the middle of the ocean, right? She escapes, lands at the Pale City, obviously has her little, like, you know, in-between game, like, filler arc for my anime fans. Gets captured by the hunter, and that's where, you know, the second game takes place. And then we go through that, you know, Six's shadow, her soul, you could say, because it's, to my interpretation, the glitches throughout the game, the little souls you see of, like, other past children and people is, like, that's, like, their essence left behind, you know, like when something is affected by the signal tower, in this case the Thin Man directly, something is left behind. I guess you could say it's like a separation, right? Like your soul, and like basically Shadow Six is almost like her soul, you know, just like watching her, like judging her, because in the first game, all the hunger scenes, Shadow Six is always watching like off to the side, you know, like you have to move your camera like to see her, and it's just something that's like, you know, it like, I guess what I'm saying is like the soul is almost like judging her, like judging her body. Oh, sorry, a better way to put it is like Six, the body, right? Like what's in the first game when she has the hunger, and it gets more and more. It's almost like the body's trying to replace, you could say, like the soul, like the void that was left behind. And it's like no matter how much she eats, or you know what I mean, like how much she tries to replace it, it'll never happen. And then of course we don't, at the end of the game, she has the gaseous powers, right? Like she's absorbing all the life force, but we don't know, is she gonna continue to like fall into the darkness, you could say, like get hungrier and just, you know, consume herself, see herself become the villain? I mean, you know, crazy stuff. And again, with that one, I think it's a prequel. I don't see it being a sequel. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I mean, a sequel, it's like, how would that... Arguments I've seen are like, okay, so in the middle of the second game, we find Six's coat, right? So it's like, is that the first time she finds it? Because, again, Very Little Nightmares, the coat is seen floating in the water. So it's like, we assume, okay, so Six got it while on the raft. But no, I mean, think, like, obviously you know how water works. Like, it takes things to land, right? Tides, like, pushes it to land. I'm pretty sure, and we see the glitches throughout the second game. You know, those are like, kids, like, that's their last moment, right? They're stuck in, like, their final moments, like, reliving it. It easily could have just been another kid wore it, obviously got lost in the Pale City, died, and boom. You know, the yellow raincoat was thrown out, and they find it again. Because it just, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, like, so she would find it, right? But then it's like, okay, but, so then how does she lose it again? Like, you get what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't make sense. Like, just... that whole, like, nah, it's like the game's a prequel, you know, Very Little Nightmares first, second game, first game, like that's how it is. of course, we could be proven wrong. I hope Tarsier would do a third game so we could get that definitive answer. And yeah, like, I don't know, guys. I'm just very pumped about this series. I love it. I mean, there's not a lot of good horror games now. I mean, the games aren't scary per se. Like, you know, you're not gonna scream and like hide behind your blanket, but it's just very I just love the tension, you know, like when you're being chased and stuff, like, it just feels so good. Like, I don't know. I hope they do a third game, and hey, I'd love it to happen after the first. Maybe we get to see what happens to Six with all her powers, you know, and like, will Mono, like the Thin Man, will they all be redeemed? Will they be able to break the cycle and like, you know, just escape the little nightmare? But with that, guys, you know, just a short, simple and sweet video. I hope you enjoyed. These are just my thoughts on some of the theories, you know, in the series. And yeah, I definitely gonna keep an eye out. I hope they do DLC. They did for the first game. You know, they had basically the runaway kid story, and I hope we get something like that. And then, hey, maybe in the DLC they'll actually answer like, oh, you know, this is a prequel, or hey, no, it's a sequel and we're all wrong. I'd love to see that. Gonna keep an eye out on it, and definitely, you know, check it out. But with that, guys, thank you for watching the video. So, I know I always say, oh, it's every Tuesday and Saturday, but with this one, you know, just personal things came up. That's why you're going to see it today, Sunday. And next video will be out on Wednesday because, again, have, you know, personal stuff. But next weekend, Saturday, we should be back on track. But yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, guys, see you in the next video. Take care.